Welcome to Innovate, Disrupt, or Die, the podcast where innovation isn't just an ideal, it's a way of life. I'm your host and creator of the Innovate, Disrupt, or Die newsletter, Danny Nathan. Hello, folks, and welcome back to Innovate, Disrupt, or Die, the podcast. This week I have Aaron Anderson with me. Aaron, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Danny. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. I'm excited about our conversation today, Aaron. I know from our intro call that you have a lot of thoughts that I think both align to mine and perhaps offer some challenging perspectives. So I'm excited here. And with all that being said, I'm going to dive into my first question, which is the same one that I ask everybody. Tell me a bit about yourself, your role, and sort of how you got into the world of innovation.
All right. Well, so my name is Aaron Anderson. I'm the innovation director at Swinerton Incorporated. Swinerton is a large national general contractor with our strongest presence over here in California. That's not really the career path that I expected to be moving down, to be honest. When I was a kid, I was really fascinated by science and technology and definitely mechanically minded, but spent almost 20 years building high-end residential housing, starting in framing and kind of coming up through that trade. But then when I was in my mid 30s, I realized that a lot of what I was doing was in the context of all these business issues and all these other aspects of, all of these other peripheral things that were happening. And then on top of that, always being sort of overlooked for that next step in the business, in the business and ownership and stuff. And so went and got a degree in commerce and studied economics. Some of the coursework I did was like in advanced econometrics, and really realized that a lot of these bigger problems had other ways of getting to solutions. And so after that, I really was thinking about consulting. I worked for a startup for a couple of years and then found my way back into construction, and have been working to kind of reconcile these two worlds, all of this opportunity and all these things that are, becoming possible out there in the world with an industry that hasn't changed a whole lot in 150 years.
Sure. So that's interesting, Aaron. You started in construction, you then sort of migrated to technology and economics and then brought it all back to construction. Am I following that correctly?
Yeah, it's sort of like an interdisciplinary approach to problem solving.
Yeah, very interesting. How did you find the transition originally from construction into sort of the world of economics and technology? Like, was that a difficult transition, or was it natural because you were so excited and interested in it?
Well, I mean, I think what you do, especially in carpentry and in a lot of construction, you do a lot of mental math.
Yeah.
You're doing a lot of spatial recognition, and you're sort of seeing how all of this stuff works together. You add a little bit of calculus and linear algebra to that, and you start to realize that what you're seeing is rates of change and these other derivatives, that's what we're actually visualizing. And so I realized that what we were doing in carpentry and in planning in our heads and intuitively had this home over here. And so that made it really easy to wrap my head around these more complicated concepts.
Very interesting. And construction, I mean, you kind of nodded to this, but construction is not a world where we generally think of cutting edge technology, perhaps more so on the commercial side, but it's not a bastion of innovation in and of itself. And so Talk to me a bit about your role at Swinerton, what you focus on today, and how you go about sort of bringing an innovative mindset into a world that is perhaps not primed for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of it is really fostering and recognizing where there is a lot of innovation in construction, right? And so in reality, every project that we do has its own new set of problems to solve. And our teams are going in and very open-mindedly attacking this new problem and finding new ways to solve that problem. The challenge is that we've had a lot of technology that has been sort of assumed that it was going to achieve productivity and growth across all these different project types and be this sort of panacea for all of our problems. And that never really materialized. Everybody loves the idea of electronification, like, oh yeah, turn these paper drawings into digital drawings. But the actual information revolution behind it um, has never really happened, and it's for a reason, right? And so that's what I think about when I think about innovation in our business is like, you know, 80%, um, 80% of like of achieving or using or utilizing these things doesn't really get us anywhere in the business. It's like we really need to be able to fully apply these technologies to achieve either strategic differentiation or operational excellence, efficiency gains. And so I'm always connecting these things back to, it's very difficult to think about an ROI on new technology in construction. And part of it is also the fragmented nature of what we do. But thinking about how it ultimately affects the way that we do business and the evolution of our business model. Because the business model itself went through some changes where everybody went more toward this general contracting model over time. And we really lost that master builder focus.
Interesting.
And so the market right now is saturated with folks that are really great at de-risking by like by sending out their risk to all of these small subcontractors in the business.
And sorry, Aaron, is the de-risking that you're describing by virtue of, sending out a bunch of bids or requests, for example? Is it de-risking because we're saying, okay, we're going to talk to 20 suppliers and find the cheapest option for plywood and the cheapest option for tile? Or is it de-risking because there is something deeper within the relationship there that has changed that, I don't know, pushes risk onto the subcontractor, for example?
It's a combination of all those things. You've got your procurement philosophies, which sort of originated with like Tirole Lafont, where you get multiple bids and you get people to reveal their true preferences and their true information by having people compete in that way. That's helped a little bit with the de-risking part, but then that's also created its own challenges in terms of having everybody siloed and really needing to find a way to
Right.
collaboratively engineer. So that creates the need for a systems engineer, and then that's sort of where the new risks emerge is in actual systems integration.
Interesting. Interesting. And in your role, Aaron, are you within the world of Swinerton, are you primarily focused on, oh, well, I guess to ask the question, help me understand more clearly what your focus is. Are you building new technologies for the world of construction? Or are you looking primarily at internal processes and thinking about, how you can innovate the way that things get done? Like what do you spend your time exploring and looking for?
It's a combination of both of those things. When I first started with Swinerton, we were working specifically on some productization. We were looking at the strategy of taking something that we were good at and taking out some of the engineering variability and getting to more of a to the market type of an approach so that we could provide a more predictable product, and control the scope and give a more predictable price. And we've learned a lot from that, but we also have learned that the construction market itself has to shift with you. That it's really hard to just introduce something new as a general contractor and not consider the motivations of the architects and the engineers. And then we've also spent quite a bit of time working on machines and tools in order to achieve higher productivity with our workers. So that creates opportunity to build a lot of efficiency into those more fixed price trades because there's a lot more upside in those trade opportunities. We if we can increase the margin from 6 to 10% in those spaces,
Sure.
those are much bigger gains than these fixed price fixed margins that exist on the general contractor side, where we're negotiating from 3% down to 2.5% down to 2% on the total revenue of a project.
Aaron, can you talk to me a little bit about, I guess, sort of where you sit within the org? As you're describing Swinerton, for example, you're talking about drywall teams and concrete teams and engineers and, all the things that I would expect to hear about for a company that is building big buildings and things. How does your innovation role or perhaps innovation team sort of fit into that? And how do you travel around the org, for lack of better terms, to sort of figure out where there's opportunity for innovation and for your input specifically to impact the way that a drywall team or a concrete team or whatever it is accomplishes their jobs?
the way that I think of my role, and it's not always defined clearly, but it's the consequence of employee ownership. There's this agency theory problem with all businesses, right? When you have like a publicly owned business, you have the CEO and you have these folks and they have their like core ideas. Mostly everyone else inside of the business is taking orders from the CEO,
Right.
right? And then the executives are taking orders from the board, and that balance between the board's expectations and the CEO is what sort of creates accountability in the business. Well, when you have employee ownership, and we're not just talking about an ESOP, we're talking about a few hundred employees that are shareholders and officers of the company.
Hmm.
What you have an organization that is really engaged in understanding and cultivating innovation amongst all of those entrepreneurs. So you have all these people who are intrinsically motivated to be better and better at what they're doing. Their motivation is a shared motivation for the company. That sounds all like chocolate and roses or whatever, but in reality it comes with its own challenges. And the challenges are that these people, these amazing employee owners, become experts in their areas. We end up with a lot of committees and a lot of groups, but then seeing beyond those individual roles and seeing outside of those areas of expertise becomes a real challenge.
If I'm hearing your description correctly, what you're kind of talking about is the dichotomy between, a CEO led and perhaps a publicly held company, for example, where you have one person at the top who is responsible for the financial stability and growth of that organization. And they are, by your description, sort of the expert. Everybody follows their marching orders. Whereas it sounds like what you're describing is more of a situation in an employee owned organization where, because the employees themselves and a large number of them are owners in the company, they feel that sense of ownership, and that drives both the need for excellence and the idea that everybody is contributing to the return on that ownership, but also then kind of creates a too many cooks in the kitchen moment where everybody's an expert in their field and wants that thing to do so well, but because that's everybody, there's no kind of captain that's coordinating. Am I getting that sort of tug of war moment correct?
Yeah, and we do have that coordinator position, right? So our CEO, who's also our president, is I see their role and all of those executives as being folks that are bringing together all of these disparate ideas and making sense out of them at at that in that driver's seat, right?
Sure. And to be clear, I'm not trying to indicate that there isn't a CEO or an
But
executive
there's a
team
lack of
who is
leader.
steering. Yeah, exactly. I'm
No,
doing a bad job of characterizing, but my
well,
expectation is that that team exists, but that perhaps the idea of employee ownership, it's empowering, but then there is a give and take around that empowerment in terms of expectation and desire to have a stronger voice in the output.
that's right. But also seeing beyond the job site, seeing beyond the project, right?
Hmm.
Seeing the organization as a whole. That's where the myopathy starts, right? Um, but
Gotcha.
but and then those executives are getting feedback from folks in the organization that are looking at the job site, right?
Hmm.
And their vision is around governance and controls and all of those sorts of things around management, right?
Right.
And so the challenge becomes how does that leadership take that focus on excellence and also get folks to start thinking cross functionally, to start thinking interdisciplinarily,
Yeah.
right? And yeah, it's like in a world of experts, who's like really figuring out the 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 what and the hows. We're very good at like tactics, but then how do we get to that sort of that gem, that precious strategic point?
Yeah, let's take a moment on that, Eric. You said you have to compromise on operational excellence in order to execute on strategy. And I'm hearing
Mm.
a bit of that tug of war in what you're describing now. You've mentioned sort of the teams and the people individually and sort of smaller contribution groups that are focused on creating a world of operational excellence. And that is somewhat at odds with the idea of major strategic leaps, or to point back at something you said just a few minutes ago, sort of this idea of incremental versus radical innovation. You clearly have thoughts there. I'm curious to kind of dig into how you view that balance between operational excellence and the opportunity for strategy and kind of the radical aha moments that make big changes happen.
So yeah, so across our industry, and this isn't unique to employee ownership, this isn't unique to Swinerton, but across the construction industry, innovation tends to be financed at the project level. Overhead is a dirty word, right? And so just the fact, even in the scenarios where we do have these large overhead accounts in the business, as much of that they can get charged back to individual projects is
Mhm.
is really like really what we do as a business. You know, we are project oriented business, and
Right.
that's how consultants work. That's how all of these firms that are project oriented work. And so what that means is that if the horizon for capabilities and skills extend beyond those project timelines and those project budgets, that it's very difficult to put aside money for that and carve that out of and energy for that and carve that out of the core business. And
Got it. So you're
so
dealing with a world where projects present opportunities for exploration and innovation, but those explorations have to be sort of time boxed and financially boxed to the scope of that project, because if you don't finish it, then there's nobody to kind of carry it forward.
and if you don't achieve efficiencies on that project, if you don't get over that capabilities gap on that project, then the conclusion is that this pilot or this idea wasn't effective or isn't an effective direction to move in.
Oh, wow. So you've got kind of a one shot chance at any given idea or innovation proving successful or not. And there isn't enough appetite for the continued exploration, the iterative kind of discovery that might happen if you weren't so project oriented.
Yeah. So the irony is that across the construction industry, innovations end up becoming table stakes really fast. So, you know, in order to develop, like most new technology, in order to develop a strategic advantage, in order to develop a differentiation, you have to get to it early, and by getting to it early, maybe you're developing a moat through intellectual property, but typically you're just developing like an early a first mover advantage, right? But when you're waiting for technology to already be able to like exhibit ROI in the market and be fully baked and ready to go, what that means is that you're moving that adoption and that learning horizon back to things that already everybody else can do.
Got it. Got it. Because I'm assuming that the structure of a construction project, and I'll use that very generally, is relatively similar from project to project. You need to build a building, and yes, the building is going to look different, but it is design and materials and et cetera. And so the uniqueness of the capability set then is similar across organizations.
Yeah, it's similar across all of the like, you know, like late adopters. I would say most of the leading construction companies are still like kind of middle of the road adopters. So very few construction companies are getting out there and capable of developing the capability, like developing the skill to execute on new technologies and new efficiencies be early.
Okay.
Because they don't have that forward investment in developing those capabilities early. So it also becomes really easy to keep up, and the attitude is that like we don't really need to get ahead of this because nobody else is really getting that far ahead of it,
Right.
right? We'll be able to catch up. And that's generally the attitude is like, hey, if we just wait, we'll be able to catch up easily. And so that's a result of the expectation that nobody can deploy new technologies or adopt new technologies until they're already proven and efficient.
Got it. Aaron, what you're describing does not, I mean, to some extent sounds unique to the construction industry, but at the same time, a lot of what you're saying are similar objections or concerns around a focus on innovation that you might hear at any relatively large organization. Would you agree with that, or am I missing some nuance in there that perhaps is poignant?
I think it's very true with any large organization. And that's, and that, like, if you look back to the academics, originally, like, Michael Porter and Christensen
Hmm.
addressed a lot of this in terms of, this idea of the institutionalization of discovery, or, building foresight mechanisms into the business. I think the challenge has always been about when to move and how to see yourself.
Hmm.
And so yeah, I mean, I think it's a consistent theme, and I think that's why I've been able to try to explore it in this construction environment, because it's very poignant, and it characterizes the current state of the entire industry,
Hmm.
and so it also represents one of our biggest opportunities, right? So whether it's
Absolutely.
we're not necessarily even talking about, and in construction, we're not necessarily even talking about disruptive innovations,
Hmm.
because it really is a fragmented industry. It would be very hard to come in with disruptive technology today and have all the liability stuff worked out and have all of these other things that you need to, like, really beat this market before the market saw those changes coming and found a way to keep up with it. But it's that radical transformation, and it's just that transformational innovation stuff that
Hmm.
that's around, like, a simple shift in a business model, or improving the way that we approach pre-construction and some of those investments in our business, and how that ultimately gives us an advantage. um you know it makes people want to work with us and for us, and creates a little bit of space for us in the market.
Aaron, I'm curious, given what you're describing and, some of the difficulties around creating an opportunity for innovation and the nuance of what you've talked about in construction in general, help me understand a bit more about how you approach your job and your role, and how do you go about making that space as an innovator within a construction industry that is, perhaps not as open to it or is more difficult to pursue those innovative opportunities in due to the time boxing and the project oriented kind of view of the way the business runs.
Yeah, I think the experience, having been in the field for 20 years, helps a lot, because what happens
Hmm.
is, like, I can I can source and ground my relationships in this common experience. So that, I sort of have, like, I have this mental model about influence in the business, and especially at an employee owned company, influence is more of a currency than authority.
Ooh, interesting.
Right. And that goes back to how you work inside of a employee owned business. Even our executives are working heavily on the influence side of things instead of their formal authorities. And so that influence building, though, involves first focusing on relationship, like who people are, who we are as common owners, and what our core values and our core hopes and dreams are for our lives. What how we see ourselves, what we want to see. Once we understand each other, then my job is really to go into those situations and start to elevate, or start to share my vision in those relationships, right? So getting to know folks and what they're trying to do in their business, and then having those conversations with them about what their current focuses are and what they could potentially be, and starting to cultivate that foresight function.
Hmm.
But then that almost never turns directly into action. So what happens is, we're basically seeding the environment with opportunity, and a little bit of that foresight culture. And then people start to see it around them, and then they recognize it, they see it in a competitor, they see it somewhere else, and slowly over time they become more and more comfortable with those risks, and that forward thinking. um, And then when that forward thinking is there, and you start to get that buy-in and that influence has worked out, then you have to also be ready. So the thing that I'm doing is I'm going out there, and these ideas and these opportunities for a business are things that I've got to go learn about and really vet and really deeply understand and know how to create the capabilities, where we need to go to be able to do this and how we can do it and how it works in our business, so that when those teams say, hey, I just changed my mind about humanoid robotics, I'm not sitting there going, oh, well, that sucks because I burned all those bridges for all those
Right.
relationships and have no idea where that's at. So I'm out there saying, I know that humanoid robotics are going to have a place in the future of construction. And I get to take those more conservative ideals, or those more momentary focused strategies, and I get to translate them into what would it look like? How would this look? And then when people are ready to move, then I can rush in with the content and the opportunities and really accelerate those conversations. So
Got it.
it's almost like the scout approach to, like what's the landscape like? What are these, how do these things really look like? And then coming back and communicating to those folks that are driving the strategy, that are making the decisions, so that when they're ready to move, we already know what direction to go.
Got it. So are you primarily then like within the organization, are you then sort of known as the guy who I have an idea, I should go and tell Aaron because he'll help figure out if, when, and how that idea should come to life? Or are you more focused on bringing those ideas to the organization so that they have to start thinking about it?
It's both. There's different kinds of innovators and different kinds of folks in the business. And honestly, everybody has a different relationship with their business and how they see the use of technology and the change in their processes and the opportunities that they see in their markets. And so it's really figuring out what they're looking at, what their problems are, and then coming to them with ideas, sharing with them how their problem might we might be able to look differently at their problem. We also have a few different structures in the organization that facilitate this. So we have our annual innovation challenge. And
Hmm.
so instead of having a box, like a comment box that we collect everybody's ideas in and they just sort of sit there and there's a huge backlog, we offer annually this innovation challenge, and we figure out in the business what the thing is that we're trying to solve, or what maybe a new technology could do for us. And then we focus on that as a theme, and we ask people for problem statements that fit that or that capability that we're trying to build. And so, we're in the middle of that right now. We've got a bunch of entries coming in, and then we also use that as an educational opportunity to cultivate that innovative thinking, where we talk to people about their ideas, and then we do some laddering up. We do some design thinking, some systems thinking with the thing, and we start to get to we really try to get to what those core jobs to be done are, and those foundational first principles are about this thing that they're looking at. And then we're able to, at that point, work with them on also developing ROIs and actually getting them to build out proposals that take into account the costs and the consequences and the needs that the organization would have for bringing that new technology into place.
Gotcha.
That's a more formal company-wide scenario that we do, and we really do that to deal with, to cultivate the thinking, and to recognize and honor the entrepreneurial nature of the business. But then we also do a lot of stuff where we have regular meetings with folks that are already early adopters in the organization. We call these the change makers meetings. And those change makers are folks that are already working on new things, and they're building those capabilities in the business that may be nascent or have fewer applications, but that we know will grow and become more important in the future. And so we try to support those, whether it's with capital or just with like physical capital, or with human capital to
Hmm.
research or support those ideas. And then we really have and then what I spend a lot of my time doing is getting out into different markets. I go into the commercial real estate technology worlds. I talk to a lot of startups. I work with a lot of folks that are outside of the business, and I'm figuring out what they're doing, how they're working with other companies, what technologies that they're developing, and then reporting that back to the company, but really strategically reporting that back to the company, talking to people that I know are encountering those types of problems in the business.
Interesting. Interesting. You said something else that really stuck with me in our intro call. You said that you define innovation as managing the inertia of incumbent industries. Given everything that we're talking about, sort of help me understand that further.
Yeah, it's a little presumptuous. The reality is that,
I appreciate that, by the way. The presumption in it.
well, I mean, the way I approach it, after having been back to school in my mid-30s, some of the people that I appreciated the most in that context were people who were they were brilliant individuals, but they would constantly say that they didn't know things. They would admit that they didn't know. And that to me is like just such a powerful approach to my own like intellectual exploration, is that I can collect facts all day long, but reality is still obfuscated. Reality is still exists inside of a cloud somewhere because there's so many of these facts floating around, and reality is how these facts actually interact with each other to like to create the reality that we're living in. So I like to collect facts but put them in the right bucket. And that's one of the things about organizational inertia, is that as this organization, we have a lot of facts. We build a ton of intuition based on those facts. And then we assume that those facts are collectively contributing to this intense clarity about the future.
Hmm.
But really, all it's doing is developing clarity about the past. And the more voices that you have experiencing the past and collecting data and information about the past, the stronger that intuition becomes about what the reality is. And so, really, at its core, it's that simple idea of that, like everything that we know about the past is just information about what might happen in the future. And we still have to run through those scenarios. We still have to be open minded about what's coming. And we have to look into all of these places and see that and gather experiences that we haven't had in order to counter that confirmation bias, in order to counter those other behavioral biases that we have about where we're going.
Interesting. So when you say that innovation is managing the inertia of incumbent industries, another way to look at that then would be innovation is the act of leveraging the past data to make assumptions and perhaps make better assumptions about the future. Is that another way to characterize what you're saying?
Yeah, but I also think it's about expanding the perspective of the organization, right? So
Hmm.
it really is that data from the past can be convergent, or that data from the past can be divergent. And whenever we look at dead ends in business, it's when that data has resulted in a divergent conclusion. I mean, a convergent conclusion, right? So when we see these businesses like these classic case studies about Kodak, and the case studies about the chip manufacturers and all these different folks that
Hmm.
have like built this huge business and then it's disappeared overnight. What we see a whole bunch of making forward conclusions about past data that is convergent. Being able to imagine what could happen, or talk to a client and try to figure out what their real problem is, and then realizing that we've been solving a problem in the past that wasn't what their real problem was, starts to reveal itself as an opportunity in the market and helps us to think differently about our past data. And so that's really the thing, is that how do we continue to develop new models for how we're processing the past and how we're looking at the past, and not just depending on a descriptive past model, but starting to think about how better ways to model the future, not so that we can know what's going to happen, but we can be prepared for the opportunities and be prepared for the the multiple winding paths that our future might take us in.
You mentioned the big C word earlier, culture, of course. Talk to me a bit more about how you cultivate a culture of innovation within Swinerton and what that means to you in terms of giving people the opportunity and the permission to explore some of those weird ideas that come to mind and some of those oddball opportunities that, I don't know, might not directly align to the current project or, may not be something that you can get done during the existing project, but is still worth pursuing.
Yeah, I think offering myself as a thought partner. I mean, I spend a lot of time talking with people in the organization. They're also one of my biggest fears in an organization that is like so busy creating outputs.
Hmm.
Like 99% of our employees on a daily basis, their job is to create deliverables and being the voice of, but trying to keep it balanced, that yes, that is our core job, is to create deliverables, to put work into place, but creating a safe space for people to talk about. And potentially, it can't just be like the complaints counter. It has to be representing myself as somebody who understands that things can be broken and amazing at the same time,
Yes.
right? That something could be world class and also full of problems all in the same moment. And so
Right.
being the voice that is like willing to carry those paradoxes around gives people the freedom and opportunity to start to think about how things work and realize that we could think through things before we take action on them and validate ideas in certain ways before we move on them, and even be maybe more conservative about validating those ideas,
Hmm.
but to take that time and energy to do that before we have to move on it.
Gotcha.
And so making space for that, making space for that exploration, I think is like what I represent to the organization.
And the org is relatively large. I mean, forgive me, I have the website pulled up here. It says, 4,300 plus construction experts, for example. So we're talking
Yeah.
about an org of thousands, and you're one man in the innovation seat. How do you like? How do you do that? How do you give that permission across that many people? Because obviously you're not having, 4,000 conversations a day, a week, I don't know, maybe even a year.
When you speak into an organization that's that large, that idea that we don't have to be perfect to be really great,
Hmm.
everybody around you starts to like buy into that, and it grows, that inertia grows a little bit. People start to be able to do that. And so the trick is really how start to capture the outputs from that. We have to also have structures in place that allow us to pilot new technologies and to foster these new emerging opportunities. And then that voice just kind of grows on its own, because it's not just me. It's there is a whole community out there, people who are doing this. And so being that bridge to that community is really the way to amplify and magnify my effect.
Got it. Absolutely. Are you all investing into startups in the construction space or anything like that? Do you have like a corporate venture capital type of approach to anything, or is that something that you've talked about for the future at all?
Yeah, it's definitely something we've talked about for the future. It is a little bit distracting. Most of the folks that have been successful at that have a different business model, and the way that they employ technology in their business is not necessarily congruent with that corporate venture capital
Hmm.
arm. There's very few firms that are investing in the same companies that they are actually growing inside their own businesses. They're doing it with, they're having that investment arm as its own independent financial instrument, its own independent investment
Yeah.
instrument that benefits from the insights of the core business. And so for us, that's, um, to be honest, we make way more money off of other capital deployments, and it's a lot less risky. But we also know that we need to support that area, so we do a lot of advisor relationships. We have a lot of direct partnerships with startups as an alternative to those direct investments, and that actually ends up in some ways being even more than what a lot of those CVCs are doing, because we're
Right.
working directly with them in that partnership. We're just not, it's not deploying capital
Well,
into that space.
yeah, and it removes a little bit of the potential for conflict of interest, I would imagine, because you're helping them develop a better product that helps your business move forward as opposed to feeling like you need to worry about theirs at the same time. Is there anything that I have failed to ask, or anything that you think would sort of put a cap on our conversation here?
I think the thing about working in innovation in a business like this is that it's fun, but it's a lot of work, right? And but it's a different kind of work. It's like
Yes.
it's thinking and talking and exploring. I get a lot of people that are like, man, I really want to be in innovation because it seems like it's like
Fun.
exciting and sexy and fun, right? But in reality, there's days where like it's the loneliest position in the world, where you're up against the entire, your ideas are running up against the entire inertia of the rest of the organization.
Aaron, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you and learning from you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Danny. It's been a pleasure also.
That's it for today. Thanks for tuning in to Innovate, Disrupt, or Die, the podcast. Join us again for our next episode, and don't forget to subscribe at innovatedisruptordie.com. That's all, folks.